The problem with the failure fad is that deep down, all of us have a kind of aversion to failure that we learned long ago.
What is your relationship like with failure? In this episode of Coaching Revealed, we revisit Amy Edmondson's keynote address at the Institute of Coaching's 2024 Coaching in Leadership and Healthcare Conference. Edmondson, the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, describes how intelligent failures can be used to unlock growth. In a hyper-competitive business landscape, the possibility of failure creates a dilemma for business leaders. Balancing cutting-edge innovation while striving for perfection leaves seemingly zero room for error. Amy shares how intelligent failures are an opportunity, and trial and error is something for us all to attempt to embrace. Through her work and writing, Amy lists the 3 kinds of failures: basic, complex, and intelligent. While some of these are avoidable, an attempt to avoid all types of failure can stifle innovation and create a workplace culture that hides the truth. Amy shares examples of what can happen when a workplace exhibits a failure is off-limits mentality. In creating healthy workplace environments for failure, Amy shares the criteria conducive for intelligent failure: new territory, credible opportunities, hypothesis-driven, and right size. Creating a culture that accepts or even celebrates failure comes down to leadership. In closing out her talk, Amy shares how leaders can create environments that are conducive to failure, helping us all understand that growth and failure are much more intertwined than we may think. Thank you for tuning into Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I love how she says I embody my message, and I'm here to talk about failure. So I don't know, not sure where you're going with that, Carol. So it's kind of a mouthful of a title, and I think Carol and I created this together. So in the next hour, I'm hoping to give you confidence that yes, intelligent failure is a key to unlocking growth. And that, yes, there is an advantage to embracing the fact of our fallibility. And I imagine, as I just get going here, that you have 3 questions, right? The first one, intelligent failure, are you serious? Okay, yes, I am, but we'll get there. What can I do, personally, to unlock growth, my own and others? And then what can I help leaders do to be more effective in a changing world, to help them lead more effectively in the organizations they lead with this focus on failure? So I've been studying failure for more than 30 years, and I have come to the conclusion, wait for it, that it's part of life. Right? It's also a part of research. It's a part of science, right? It's a part of science in every field. So let me introduce you to Jen Heemstra. Jen is a chemist. She was the first woman to get tenure at Emory University. She's now at Washington University in St. Louis, runs a busy and successful scientific laboratory. Does that mean then that everything that Jen touches, goes well? Of course not. In fact, Jen estimates that 9 out of 10 experiments run in her busy lab end in failure. She's at the top of her game, right? So she emphasizes that failure is part of science. And I add failure is part of life, and failure is part of progress in any field. Now, to help her young students feel better about that, she says things like, we're going to fail all day. This kind of cheerful warmth about the work that they have chosen to do. And of course, she's trying to detoxify failure. She's trying to help these young people feel better about it, to not feel the pain that they invariably feel when an experiment doesn't turn out the way they had hoped. But again, this is really part of our lives. So Jen, I would argue, is part of a kind of visible leader in what I'm going to call the failure craze. Craze? Yes, really, craze. So you may have heard about these, again, pardon my language, but this is a sort of a global movement where in more than 200 cities in 62 countries, People meet on a monthly basis sometime to share on stage professional failures that they have experienced, right? So there's a lot of happy talk about failure. And Silicon Valley, right? Fail often, fail fast, all this happy stuff, right? Well, you know, maybe not so fast, right? So here's, I wrote this book because of this, right? Because I thought a lot of the happy talk about failure was a bit simplistic, and that we need more nuance, and that we maybe need better definitions and frameworks that I believe coaches can really put to use. So the problem with the failure fad is that deep down, all of us have a kind of aversion to failure that we learned long ago, right? Sometime in elementary school, we got the idea loud and clear. I want to be right, not wrong. I want to be successful, not failing. And I'm going to now devote myself to looking like that, which of course ties in so nicely to Bob's presentation too, of the, you know, all of the sort of curated external lives that we look at. So this is, you know, this is part of our psychology, and our organizations often make it worse. So I was talking a couple of years ago with some executives from a large financial services firm who informed me that, yes, they liked my work, and now, they said, in the turbulent times we now face, now it's important, they said, that everything go well. They literally said, failure is off limits. Now, I sure empathized, right? But here's the problem. It's wishful thinking, right? In turbulent times, failure is even more likely. And in turbulent times, innovation is even more necessary, right? So I tried to help them see that if you say failure is off limits, either explicitly or implicitly with your behavior, it will be very effective, not at producing perfection, but at producing silence, right? It will be very effective at making sure you don't hear the truth of what's really going on. So that's not exactly what I think you're hoping to do. So that's sort of why I think we have to talk about this, why we need to make some better distinctions. Because what I will argue is what those executives and the rest of us need to understand is that, yes, there are failures we should work hard to prevent. And there are others that we must embrace and welcome, and in fact, even push for more of. And those are the intelligent ones. So let me get specific. All right, so I identify three types of failures in the failure landscape: basic, complex, and intelligent. The first two are those we should work hard to avoid. Now, a basic failure is a failure that occurs. By the way, a failure is simply an undesired outcome of some action or events. And a basic failure is one that has a single cause, usually human error. And it takes place in familiar territory. A complex failure, in fact, is one in which a handful of factors come together to produce the failure, any one of which on its own would not cause failure. And then we draw a line, because now we're over in the part that we really must learn to fall in love with, which are the intelligent failures. And these are the still undesired, just ask Jen Heemstra, results of thoughtful forays into new territory. These failure types correspond with, but not perfectly, the three different kinds of contexts. So intelligent failures are the right kind of wrong. The three contexts, I will call them consistent, where we have a very high degree of certainty and predictability, as in an automotive assembly line, or variable, where we have mature knowledge about how to get the results we want, and anything could happen. There will be some need for customization, some unexpected events, as in healthcare delivery, and then novel, where we just frankly don't have a clue yet how to get the result that we dearly want, or the discovery that we dearly want. But as I will show you shortly, these are not completely overlapping phenomena, right? That basic failures, in fact, are part of the consistent landscape, but you can make a basic failure happen in a laboratory. Just mix up the chemicals by mistake, right? And then you get a bad result, but it wasn't because you learned something new. In fact, you didn't learn something new. So Thomas Edison, scientists get this, inventors get this, elite athletes get this, all sorts of people get this. This quote comes apparently, apocryphal perhaps, story about the famous inventor where a lab assistant came up to Edison and with empathy said, "Gosh, it must be so hard for you, all those failures." And he turned to look at the young man. "Failures? I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." Right? So Edison understood the right kind of wrong. He understood that all of these potentially frustrating failures were in fact stepping stones toward world-changing inventions. The innovation is going to be central to our story here. But not all failures are intelligent. So here's one that was decidedly not. A couple of years ago, a Citibank employee accidentally checked the wrong box in an online form and accidentally wired the principal rather than the interest, $900 million to a group of lenders. A controversial ruling in the court system wouldn't let that money get returned, finders keepers ruling. So again, basic does not mean small. It just means we can point to one error in a domain where we should have known better and lead to the failure. So those financial services executives, yes, they would be right to want to prevent basic failures. In fact, ironically, one of the ways we try to avoid basic failures is through tools like checklists. And I'm a huge fan of checklists and Atul Gawande's wonderful checklist manifesto, and they must be used while awake. That's a basic failure. Here, more recent sad story, is a complex failure. Now, a colleague of mine in France created a very detailed case study of this failure, of this story, and by my sort of count, I can identify 10 deviations from optimal practice. The workers doing renovations would smoke in their breaks on the scaffolding. Again, we don't know that led to this fire, but that is a fact. Electric bells had been installed in the cathedral roof. That comes with wiring, electric. Old, 1,000-year-old lumber, very dry, very vulnerable, as it were. Workers would store their scaffolding in the roof space near those bells. That may have disrupted the wiring. The fuse box that was installed so workers could recharge their tools was also in that vicinity. It happened to have been left on the night of the fire. There was routinely welding work being done in the vicinity of these very old wood structures. A security guard gave the wrong site information to the warden when he responded to a red light alert. Waited 30 minutes before alerting the warden. The design of the fire alarm system, which I won't go into, was not ideal and built in a large delay of about a half an hour or 20 minutes at minimum between alert and response. And the fire alarm system required looking up to it gave you codes, and then you had to look up the codes in this vast manual to see where they corresponded to. Right? Again, been operating the structure, of course, it had no problems for millennia, but now all of this comes together and creates that complex failure. I guess I will say before I get on to David Kelly here that complex failures are on the rise because of the remarkable interconnectedness of our systems in our world, and we're quite vulnerable to them. So we have to get out ahead of those in ways I can describe later. Now, growth requires failure, innovation requires failure. This is just simply part of the journey. If you sign up for growth, you sign up for, hopefully, intelligent failure. Now, David Kelly, a Stanford engineering professor and co-founder, and then for a long while CEO of IDEO, arguably the world's most celebrated product design and innovation consultancy, would go around routinely, still does, to tell the teams working on various projects for clients, fail often, he would say, with this big grin, to succeed sooner. Now, I think the deeper question, and the question for you is, why does David feel a need to say that? Surely, every single IDEO employee already knows this. So think about your answer to that question. Like, why waste his breath? And my answer is, these are all, the people who get hired at IDEO, very desirable place to work, they've never seen an A- in their life, right? So intellectually, right, they get this, but emotionally, not so much, right? And they think they're going to be the ones that just can go straight to success without all of these creative failures along the way. So let's talk a little bit about innovation. I studied one of the baby bells 25 years ago as they were developing a brand new technology, to get most of their customers were still on dial-up internet, right? So it's that long ago, and they had a new technology to allow high-speed access. By the way, this was a well-run company. They'd been in business for 100 years, essentially, and they kind of had their consistent game down pat. 90% customer satisfaction, mid 90% customer satisfaction. They had a debate that I was privileged to observe in the executive team about whether to launch this new tech in their large urban market, major metropolitan city. And they'd had a pilot to assess, how effective this would be. A small, well-staffed, successful pilot in the suburbs. They made the decision to go for it, announce it, roll it out, full scale, in the big city, and guess what happened? Failed. This is, after all, a talk on failure. But this was not just a little failure, right? This was a kind of fiasco failure, a colossal failure. At any given time, for months, there were 20,000 late orders. There were, 500 people on average on a busy, on hold, waiting for help, right? I forgot to mention, the telco was in the midst of a major rebranding campaign. They had spent big money on sort of advertising their new name and identity and so forth. So this was actually not, I'm going to say not the right kind of wrong. This was big, expensive, and it took months and months and months to dig themselves out. But let me ask you this, why didn't the pilot prevent the fiasco? You're probably thinking what I'm thinking, but I'm going to put it differently, which is because the pilot was a success. For the pilot to have done its job, it should have failed. Yes, failed. Well, I don't mean failure with a capital F. I don't mean become its own little fiasco. I mean, of course, to stress test the technology under real, not idealized, operating conditions. So here are 4 diagnostic questions that I think can help us identify whether or not our pilots, our R&D, as it were, are effective. Number 1, is the pilot being tested under typical representative operating conditions? Absolutely, they missed that one. It was, not only way too many customer service reps, the, best educated customers with the best equipment, but even the best looking customer service reps. That part, I'm joking, that's not true. So is the goal, right, is the goal to learn, or is the goal to demonstrate to higher ups how great is my innovation? Is it clear that compensation and performance opportunities are not linked to a successful pilot? If they're going to be linked to anything, it ought to be the real thing, right? But I'm not sure I'd advocate one way or the other there. And finally, were explicit changes made as a result of the pilot? If not, you didn't learn anything, and that, in fact, is the whole point of the pilot, is to learn. So I like to say that the pilot failed by succeeding, and it should have succeeded by failing. You see what I'm talking about, right? Let's get specific now. What is an intelligent failure? Which they did not do there. That was an unintelligent failure. Criterion 1, it does take place in new territory. Actually, telco got that right? It was new territory. Had not had this technology before. There is no way to just look up the answer and use it. Number two, you see a credible opportunity to advance toward a desired goal, whether that's personally or professionally or the team or the company. There is an opportunity here that you see. Certainly that was true for telco. Number three, you have done your homework. You have a hypothesis that you want to test. Again, they're fine there. Here's where they fell short. Here's where I often see companies falling short. The failure is no larger than necessary to give us the new knowledge that we need. And you might be wondering about the half criterion. The half criterion or the half attribute is this. We pause, we take the time to learn and share the lessons from our failure. That's what ultimately makes it intelligent. So telco, I'm going to call it a preventable complex failure created by those old mental models, right? Those sort of perfect execution mental models, habits, precluding what they needed to do. You know, whoever ran the pilot had that habit, like, I gotta look good. No, you don't, right? You gotta figure out what actually works and what doesn't, even more important. So that habit got in the way, and that was so deeply ingrained in them, you know, more or less post the time of Alexander Graham Bell. So, fail smart, fail small, that's intelligent, that's what we're talking about. This, I'm not gonna spend much time on this, it's from the book, but I wanted to make that point that even though there is this, you know, beautiful correspondence between basic failure and consistent or predictable contexts, it's not 100% correlated, right? There's the diagonal slice here, you know, storm, traffic, and crew shortages leaving thousands of passengers stranded in Dallas Fort Worth Airport. That's a complex failure in a variable context. Scientists, you know, getting a hypothesis not confirmed or disconfirmed is in a novel setting. But you can make all kinds of failures in all kinds of contexts. Just wanted to make that point. Okay, so what can you do, right, to unlock growth, your own and others? I think it starts with this old trope, right? We know this. We live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. But what if? What if we really took it seriously? What if you woke up and came to work and realized, yeah, there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. How would you have to show up? How would you have to think? Well, one implication of this, which is where a lot of my work has been dedicated, is that anyone's voice could make a crucial difference at an unexpected time. We've got to make it safe to speak up. And another implication, I will argue, is that things will go wrong, right? Even if we declare failure off limits, it won't work. Some failures will sneak through, and some of them will even be valuable. Right? So it's mental models. We need to play with our mental models and help others do the same. For instance, I think most of us, you know, maybe from elementary school, have this implicit or taken for granted mental model, right? People work hard, they'll get success in any given task or project. If they don't work hard, we'll get failure. And that is indeed sometimes true. However, this is also sometimes true. You know, you can work really hard, just ask Jen Heemstra, and get a failure. You can also mail it in and occasionally get lucky, right, in a VUCA world, right? So deeply internalizing that there is an imperfect, at best, relationship between effort and success is part of the program. It's about taking the intelligence of intelligent failure to heart. It's about recognizing that the only way to make progress in new territory is through trial and failure. You will notice I don't use the usual term here, trial and error. I think that's a misnomer, because error implies we already have an answer, we already have a protocol, but someone made a mistake. That's not what I'm talking about with intelligent failure. I'm talking about we don't know, and the only way to get the knowledge we seek is to try. So of the three types, intelligent failure is the only kind of failure that's not theoretically preventable, but they are avoidable. So am I contradicting myself? No. This is, how do we avoid them? We just don't take any risks, right? We don't experiment. We sort of steadfastly stick to our knitting, which of course creates a whole nother kind of risk, right? The risk of stagnation, the risk of failing to grow, the risk of failing to adapt in a world that keeps annoyingly changing on us. So as Jeff Bezos wrote in the annual report a few years ago, to invent, you have to experiment. And if you know in advance,
ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
right, that it's going to work. It's not an experiment. Okay, I know, pretty basic, right? But what's he reacting to, right? He's reacting to that desire that we all have to kind of play it safe, to look like we're experimenting telco pilot. So here are, the 5 criteria basically can be translated into coaching questions, which I won't do this slowly, but they're all available. The deck is available, and the book has this on page 62. But, question 1, is there a meaningful opportunity worth pursuing? What am I hoping to accomplish? And that'll remind me why it's worth the risk of failure, right? Because I care about this goal. Number 2, any chance I can just ask a friend, ask a colleague, ask an expert, look it up on the internet? Is there knowledge already about this? If so, use it. Number 3, have I done my homework? Right? Have I got good reason to believe this might work? And have I mitigated the risks, right? Have I designed the experiment to be right size, just big enough to bring us new information and no bigger? And then finally, how will I plan to work to sort of mine the lessons? What will be my plan? Because if you don't sort of plan this in advance, I think you're at risk of, okay, I didn't like that, let's move on, right? Let's pivot, but not pause. You've already invested in it. You might as well reap the value of your investments here. So what to ask to pursue this? Now, some things get in the way. 2 big things, sort of human psychology and organizational climate. Let me describe that with a story. This is a team exercise. It's called the Electric Maze. How many of you have ever done this? 1 hand, 2, 3. Okay, so a handful of you. You'll get this. This will bring it all back, right? So these are some of my students doing this a few years ago, and they're in the classic stork position, which I'll describe in a moment. So what's the exercise? Well, as you can see, it's a carpet. It's a grid with about 9 by 6 squares. Some of these squares emit an annoying beeping sound when you step on them. Others make no sound when you step on them. The team assignment is to find the path of contiguous, non-beeping squares through the maze. No way to find it without trial and failure, right? You must step. And a beep going forward is indeed a failure. By the way, if you step on a beep we'd already discovered, that's a mistake, right? That's actually not a beep going forward, but that one actually is costly. Just to give you a better idea of what what this looks like and why it's pretty tricky, I'll share with you the formula, and then I have to kill you. But here it is. So you can see everywhere there's an X, that square beeps when you step on it. Got a couple of dead ends that the students are vulnerable to falling into. In one case, you actually have to go backwards to go forward. Lots of nice metaphors, right? But it's clearly, and I tell them this, it's an innovation task, right? There is no way to solve it without trial and failure. Give them 10 minutes to strategize on how they're going to do that, and then they must be quiet and walk through. Okay, so now to the image. We got the student. This student is on the front lines, somewhere where we have not yet been. There is no team knowledge about which of these squares beep and which don't. So the student stands, oh, I forgot to tell you, 20 minutes, right? They must solve it in 20 minutes, and the time is ticking by. And this is what I see, right? This is not a good use of time, right? So most of them fail, right? Most of them fail to get it done in the allotted time. So in the debrief, which is, of course, where the action is, I asked them, because everybody had a chance to, be on the rug 1 or 2 times, right? So I asked, what were you thinking when you were on the front line, right? The new terrain lies ahead. What do you think they said? Exactly. I didn't want to make a mistake, right? Which, by the way, is wrong, because it's not a mistake. It's just data, right? So they've got that wrong. And then, meanwhile, what do you think happens when a student steps on a quiet square? What does the team do? Yay, right? When a student steps on a beeping square, what does the team do? Oh, right? Sometimes they even turn their back, like physically. They just move away from you, loser, right? So, so here are the two, here's the takeaway, right? I say, when you are, in your future jobs, leading a team engaged in innovation, there will be 2 powerful forces making them not do as good a job as they must do to succeed, right? And one is self-talk. They will be telling themselves all sorts of crazy, erroneous self-talk, like, I don't want to make a mistake. Wrong, right? You have to help them see that a beep going forward is data. It's valuable, right? In fact, what should the teams do when you step on a beep? Yay, exactly, because it's just data, right? It's a beep going forward. So I introduce this to you here now to say that we need to help our clients, our students, have fun experimenting when the stakes are low. So a key piece of leveraging intelligent failure to achieve and unlock growth is what I'll call context awareness or situation awareness for alliteration. So develop situation awareness. What does that mean? That means wherever you are, whatever the job, the task, the situation is, how high are the stakes? And when I think about high and low stakes, I've come up with only 3 dimensions, right? 1 is human safety, 2 is economic or financial stakes, and then the 3 is reputational, right? Are they high or low? Any one of those dimensions. And then, is this a relatively consistent context, a well-understood but variable context, or a novel context? And how you proceed should be slightly different and certainly very aware of where you are on this landscape, right? So if you're in a high-stakes, consistent context, high-speed rail, for example, many other examples can come to mind, a mindful execution, right? Perfection every time. Even an automotive assembly line, the stakes are high economically, and mindful execution. Variable context and novel context, they kind of bleed together here. We should be cautious. We should be thoughtful, very careful, very small when we are experimenting. Whereas novel context, low stakes, have fun. Right? Have fun experimenting, whether it's the electric maze or Jen Heemstra's lab. And sure, this big box over here, totally fine to be casual, business as usual. So being aware of where we are and what risks can we take and what risks can we not take is a crucial discipline of failing well. So titrate vigilance, right? These students are far too vigilant for the situation they find themselves in, but be cautious when necessary. Good example of that, Ben Berman, an aviation safety expert and United Airlines captain whom I had the privilege to interview for this book. And he said every time, and he knew those black box data well from his early career, said every time he had the privilege to lead a new crew, he would open the briefing meeting, which this is a fairly frequent event, as follows. He would say, and I quote, "I have never flown a perfect flight, and it won't happen today either. Right? I need to hear from you. Psychological safety, yes, and just awareness, right? Situation awareness. That don't think of this as, yeah, what is it today? Chicago, Fort Lauderdale, routine, nothing to it. Well, yeah, it's pretty routine, but no, it's variable and the stakes are incredibly high. Now, in the interview, Ben did admit to me that it really bothers him that he's never flown a perfect flight. Yeah, right? Says, I sure would like to be able to claim, I had a sort of a period of perfection there, but turns out he's a fallible human being, just like the rest of us. Here's another fallible human being, Ray Dalio. He is a 1975 alumnus of Harvard Business School. He started his own investment firm, Bridgewater Associates. Maybe you've heard of it. In 1982, he had already achieved so much success that he was routinely asked to speak on television about, the business climate and what was happening. He was especially proud of his ability to predict long-term trends. In 1982, Dalio decided, by a number of economic indicators he had been following, that the US economy was about to go into a deep recession. So he bet everything in the firm, everything he owned really, on that prediction. He was aware that it was controversial, but he was sure he was right. Some of you may remember that in 1982, the US economy started one of its longest growth periods in history. So he lost everything. Right? He had to borrow money from his dad to pay his rent. Right? So this is really quite a come down. To his credit, Dalio says, in retrospect, that failure was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It gave me the humility I needed to balance my aggressiveness and shift my mindset from thinking I'm right to asking myself, this is the tiniest shift you'll ever see, but it's profound. Thinking I'm right to asking myself, how do I know I'm right? Right? It's just that tiny little dose of curiosity that comes in now, right? Which is part of self-awareness, I will argue. In the book, I talk about self-awareness, situation awareness, and system awareness. This is about cultivating humility, right? Cultivating humility and curiosity, because we live in a VUCA world, right? You just can't you can't have the belief that you know. And we are hardwired to have that experience of knowing. Even at this moment, I look out and I think, I'm under the illusion that I see reality. I don't. I see reality filtered through my background, my biases, and the moment, right? And so I must force myself to choose learning over knowing, because knowing just keeps choosing me, right? So I got to choose learning actively. And so to do this, and I got this from Larry Wilson, who I worked for years ago, who I just adored, learned so much from, and he got it, roughly speaking, from Maxie Maltzby, who was a rational behavior therapy pioneer, African-American physician from the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s onward, died not so very long ago in his 90s. Maxie had a kind of 6-step process for healthy thinking. And Larry looked at it and said, really, it's 3. Stop, challenge, choose. Right? And this is, I think, the essence of self-awareness is master the pause. Stop. I'll give you the diagnostic questions here. I'm going to try not to dwell on them too long, so make sure we have time for questions and so forth. But, it's just about what's going on, what's the big picture, how was I feeling before this happens? Interrupt the emotional response, take a deep breath. And the challenge is analytical, right? Take a look, examine the content of your spontaneous thinking, which is usually something along the lines of, I'm going to die, right? When it really, you have to actually train your brain. I really mastered this one. I do it all the time. Train your brain to say, well, that's inconvenient, right? I'm going to miss the meeting. Well, it's awful. No, it's inconvenient, right? And then finally, choose a more rational response, one that helps you move forward, one that preserves your happiness and health and options moving forward. So useful questions. Again, those are also fully in the book. So thriving as a fallible human being. I think maybe this is not meant to be a complete list, but I think these are 4 competencies that we must master. Persistence, right? I mean, we don't have to find 10,000 ways that don't work, but we often do need to persist when we want to accomplish hard things, of course, and we can dig into that if you wish. Reflection. developing the habit of actively reflecting on what happened. What did I learn from it? Where did I fall short? Where am I pleased with how that went? Accountability, which really means owning your contributions of omission or commission to the outcome, both good and bad, but especially bad. And last but not least, wait for it, apology, right? We have to learn to put relationships ahead of ego. The purpose of an apology is to repair the relationship, right? Because a failure will often do harm to that relationship. And of course, there's good and bad apologies. You already know this. I'm in favor of the good kind, which includes some accountability and some commitment to doing better going forward. Okay, last but not least, what can I do? What can I help leaders do, right, to be more effective in a changing world, to be more effective in their jobs? Ken Frazier was until recently the CEO of Merck. He was in my classroom 2015, a few years ago, and he said this, and it just was like a light bulb for me. I wrote it down. I got his permission to use it. He said, leadership is the art of harnessing the efforts of others to achieve greatness. I love the humility in that statement. To me, it implies you're not doing it, right? They are. But it's your job to create the conditions where they can do that, right? So how do we create the conditions where people can fail intelligently to achieve greatness? I think it starts, again, mental models, rethinking what is excellence in a VUCA world. It's not perfection. It's, yes, do everything we can to minimize basic failures, do everything we can to anticipate, mitigate, and prevent many complex failures, and then finally promote and celebrate the beeps going forward, right? So this cannot happen without a commitment to remaining error aware. Like, just be aware of fallibility, your own and others, and the systems in which we operate. Like, things will go wrong, so we're ever alert. We want to catch and correct so that we can prevent real harm, and of course that requires psychological safety. Psychological safety to make it easy for people to speak up, and yes, to also make it easy for them to experiment and to speak up about the failures that happen in a timely way. If something goes wrong in an organization where you're working, it could be because someone woke up that morning determined to cause mischief, right? Obviously blameworthy. Or it could be a whole bunch of other things, all the way over to a thoughtful experiment where we did not know what would happen, and alas, a failure. Okay, I won't get into where we'll draw the line or why, but let's just ask this. What % of failures in this organization, whatever that means to you, are caused by an individual's obviously blameworthy act? Most people will say very few, like precious few, you know, less than 1% sometimes. Sometimes they'll say larger. I say, okay, because they know that people aren't coming to work to be blameworthy. Then I say, well, what % of failures are you treating as if they were caused by a blameworthy act? Here we see a gap. Right? And this is the gap that must be closed because it reduces willingness to speak up in a timely way, which then reduces our ability to thrive and unlock growth. So it's just, again, this is all mental models, right? So psychological safety, which is a belief that the context is safe for interpersonal risk, right? To reduce physical risk, to reduce business risk, that I can speak up in this place without concern of rejection, with an idea, a question, a concern, yes, even a failure. Not that it's easy, but that you believe it's valued around here. And it's not about being nice. It's not being comfortable. In fact, it's being comfortable, being uncomfortable, I think. It's not job security. It's not lowering standards. Let me illustrate that, right? There is no trade-off here. These are just two hard leadership jobs. These are two jobs you must coach your clients on helping people be inspired and enabled to achieve high standards, and helping them feel safe to speak up honestly and quickly. Otherwise, they're in the apathy zone. And sure, if it was only psychological safety, maybe you'd be at risk of the comfort zone. But this is the one that worries me, the anxiety zone, where people are motivated, they care, and they just can't ask for help when they're in over their head, right? Or they can't admit a mistake, or they can't call a project they can't close it down in a timely way. So this is where we need to be in a VUCA world, right? High standards, high safety, so that we can learn and grow together. My finance colleagues, and those are the high status people on a business school campus, they're always talking about ratios. So I thought I'd start talking about ratios. Now, I mean something slightly different, but I will ask, and I will ask you to ask leaders everywhere, what percent of what you're hearing is basically good news versus bad, agreement versus dissent and so on, success versus failure? If you're hearing a lot of green, I guarantee it, you will have had a better week. And I also guarantee it might not be the full picture in a VUCA world, right? So you've got to force yourself to think of the red as a gem. The red is the treasures. The red is what we need very deeply. So unlocking growth through intelligent failures, a few strategies to share. Convey compelling, ambitious goals for the future, greatness. Emphasize the need for experimentation. The welcoming of intelligent failures on the way to discovering what actually works and what doesn't. Point to the risk of not experimenting as a very real. The invisible risk is just as important as the visible risk, but most people don't think of it that way. And create space and time, slack, for experimentation. Great organizations like 3M do that routinely. They just build it in. You've got your 15% or your 20% time to just play around with possibilities. Reward beeps going forward and distinguish between preventable failures and one more, which is share the news about failures as quickly and widely as possible. So one more provocative question, which is, should you go so far as to have failure parties, right? You've heard about these, right? Failure parties, right? Well, I'm going to say yes, partly because I'm a fan of ritual, and partly for the following reason. I think a failure party, first, rewards the beeps, right? Rewards the hard work. Second, if you have a party, people come, so then they learn, because let me tell you, an intelligent failure the second time in your same company is no longer intelligent. So you got to spread the word. And third, it does in a subtle way encourage people to raise their hand when this thing's going south in a more timely way. And that's money in the bank, right? Just those resources can now be redeployed. There's a great story about Eli Lilly. The first time I ever heard about this, the chief scientific officer had instituted these failure parties. They had a drug, it was written about in the Wall Street Journal, called Alimta. It was looking good, safety trials, clinical trials, all's well. Then they get to the efficacy trials, and it flunked, right? It failed. And so at a failure party, we'll reward the hard work. But of course, it doesn't stop there, because the chief, the head of the clinical trial, the trial comes to an end. We get the data. No, the drug didn't do what we wanted it to do against the cancer it was fighting, so it's a failure at the end of the trial. But of course, what do you do next? You try to figure out why. So the scientist running the trial looked into the data and discovered something rather interesting. Many patients in the trial did quite well with the drug. Others showed no impact. Anything we can say about those two groups? Yes, it turns out these folks have a folic acid deficiency. Simple, B vitamin, right? So all we have to do is add that to the mix, and then Alimta actually becomes a multi-billion-dollar drug. Now, I can't promise that if you do the hard work of learning from failure, it will always convert to a major success. But I can promise that if you don't do the work of learning from the failure, it will not turn into a success, right? So there's a kind of asymmetry there. But some companies, it's just too much. So I interviewed Jake Breeden at Takeda, Japanese history. He said, we just can't do it. They won't do it, right? So what do we do instead? We celebrate the pivot. Now, this isn't just words, right? He says, instead of we made a plan and we failed, and here's the moral, it's a narrative about change. We made a plan, things didn't go as planned, so we pivoted, okay? More than words, right? Because it focuses us on where the story goes next. It brings suspense rather than shame. So what he says is, here's what we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the fact that our signals are so finely tuned that we stopped this before anybody got hurt. We're going to celebrate the fact that all our eggs aren't in the same basket, and we're going to celebrate the fact that we are still committed to this therapeutic area, right? So unlocking growth through intelligent failures. I will end with this slide, the strategic advance of embracing our human and organizational fallibility it is a way to unlock growth. We are fallible human beings. I got that from Maxie Maltzby. I call it FHBs for short, each and every one of us. And that is not cause for shame. That's cause for learning and growth. So do one thing every day that scares you. Thank you. Well, I did one thing today that scares me, so thank you for letting me do that, which was, giving a talk is always scary, even though it doesn't look like it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.